that's what I tend to do with this thing. I can tell you what the thing is, maybe?
Yeah, let's get the iPad going.
All right.
What were you using? You were using all the modules and things for that, or what was the primary? You want to get the iPad going?
So, the, whoa. Hello. Hello. Yeah, the patch I have going on here is got kind of two identical voices, a triangle core VCO going into the angle grinder. One of them is going into a VCA and then into the 100 grit. Kind of using the angle grinder to in the sort of like modified pulse width modulation patch, so it gives it that like throbbing, droning tone to it and makes it sound really thick and gives the grit more to chew on. And yeah, so I was mostly just focusing on playing the grit on that bass voice, and I brought in the second voice every now and then. Then I have the mutant bass drum, which a couple times I fed into the 100 grit, and the interstellar radio with a Bastel skis makes a pretty good hi-hat, I think. And a couple times I opened up the envelope on the skis to get just the washes of sound that the interstellar radio is pretty good at. It's just a very small envelope and VCA combination. Yeah, I usually use the interstellar radio for percussion. It just requires an envelope and a VCA to do so. Yeah, so the 100 grit is based on the output section of the modified output section of a certain vintage synthesizer. What makes it special though, like it has a transistor ladder low pass filter in there, a vintage style OTA VCA feeding into basically a headphone amplifier that's just being crushed and freaking out. And there's actually two of those headphone amplifiers in there. Don't know how good this is, but yeah, so every input that's not that you don't have a cable plugged into. And for most of this, I was using external modulation, but any input you don't have something plugged into has a feedback path connected to it. And that's what makes it more interesting as a playable instrument, I think. And also the touch points, of course. I've got a little map of the touch points on the block diagram. They're all the CV points are actually on the touch points, as well as a couple points in the circuit that you can't get to without the touch points. But they're arranged so that each any point that's next to another point should provide something different and interesting. So that's with no input and just my middle finger. I tend to play it either like that or that's the cutoff knob. Sure. So, so you've got your main input in one. If there's nothing plugged into that, there's actually this really, really bizarre distortion being fed into that normal. Input 2 just mixes together with input 1 at the input of the transistor ladder filter, as you can see here. And that one has the output of the main distortion normaled into it, which acts as a feedback path, kind of like a distorted resonance when you plug into that. So with input 1 brought up a bit, gain up, you always because the structure is input, filter, VCA, distortion output, and then distortion, you always need to have the gain up to get any sound out of it.
Does that amp clamp 100%? Like if you use it, would it be a silent VCA?
Yeah, the question is, would it act as a silent VCA? And the answer is yeah. I did not show it in this mode at all, but I spent a fair amount of time where if you want to use it as a vanilla filter and VCA, like you just want that Moog sound, it's got it there. There is a header on the back that allows you to use the traditional Moog resonance path. By default, that's disconnected, and a modified resonance path that allows, so if you turn up the resonance, you can always hear so with everything down, that's what the resonance sounds like as like a vanilla type filter. It doesn't drop out the bass and just turn into a whistle the way the Moog resonance would. And you have several other resonance paths, like so input 2 with no input provides another resonant path. You can combine all the resonant paths to get weird sounds. It reacts in a more interesting way to a dynamic signal. Like you can just filter an oscillator, but lately I've been feeding either a kick drum or a oscillator with a VCA after it. Like here with the kick drum, you get a and that's out of the clean output, actually. If you want things to get really gnarly, you do. But yeah, so the answer was, can you use it as a clean VCA? And yes, it does. Yeah, it seems to be gone. What other questions you guys have? I don't know. I will probably have some prototypes at KnobCon and ask you guys that question, because this is usually how I roll. I make a bunch of stuff and I kind of know what to do with it, and I show it to other people and they give me a better idea of what I should do with it. So yeah, I honestly don't know what's coming next. So we've got there are 150 made right now. We've actually got the boards for 300. So with a little luck, we'll get through those by the end of the year. The retail price is $260.
What do you suggest you use this for? Just as a VCA, distortion, or filter, or all three at once?
So the question from Phil is what the suggestion usage is: VCA, filter, VCA, all of the above. What makes it really interesting to me is all these feedback paths and the distortion output. So if you're not interested in distortion some of the times, you can probably find another cleaner filter and VCA. But since it does operate as a clean vintage voiced filter and VCA, you can use it as that your output section in your synth, or as a distortion, or both at the same time. Or you can unplug everything and use it as a horrible noise box.
Those touch points are real similar to a crackle box. When you loop that, you have
So yeah, this chip has actually been used in crackle boxes before. This is there was some inspiration taken from crackle boxes for sure.
there is original noise box.
Yeah, the original crackle box, as I understand it, used is like a strange discrete circuit that used the properties of certain transistors to really flip out, and it just has a lot of touch points. But people have kept making crackle boxes over the years, and there's a pretty wide range of different chips that if you just basically connect a touch point to every pin on the chip, you can play it like a weird noise box. And that did feed into this. I kind of tried to combine circuit bending with experience I've had modifying old synthesizers. What up, Chris?
How do both the CDs, the CD jacks and the touch points, do they sum with the knob setting, or does it break the audio?
So the question is whether the CVs and the knobs break or sum. So I've actually got that on the block diagram. The CV inputs all sum with the knobs. The knob, well, resonance and frequency are both acting as biases, basically, and the inputs are summed with that. If you plug something into a jack, it breaks the normalization, which means that if you're not planning to use a certain like CV input, you're probably going to want to either turn it down, or you're going to have or know that you're trying to turn up a feedback path there. Yeah, just because something's unplugged doesn't mean there isn't something happening with that knob.
So like a dummy cable to reduce the distortion.
You could just turn it down. Yeah, all of the every knob is always doing something, whether or not you have something plugged into it. And if you don't want it to do something, just turn it all the way down. You never need to use dummy cables. Unless you want to pick up radio waves. That's a good use of dummy cables. But you can also do that just by, there's one of the touch points in here where you can usually get some radio. Yeah, maybe not today. I don't know. No using me as an antenna today. What's going on back there, Daniel?
Very interesting. Look forward to. I'm looking forward to actually playing kind of lighter sounds for this and seeing what that feels like. Taking soft things and corrupting them.
Like what's off?
I don't know offhand. I'm definitely gonna put an SMR through this and see how that goes. Like just letting it on like a sparse path. I'd like to hear the sound of it sort of erupting, like falling apart with space.
So Daniel mentioned running cleaner, softer sounds into it to get, sounds falling apart. That's certainly doable. Yeah, I would highly recommend that. One thing about this design, which I like, is there's kind of 3 points at which you're getting distortion. So you're going to get out a clean signal if you open up the, if you use the out as opposed to the distortion out. You put a signal into either one of the inputs, turn to somewhere between 1/2 and 3/4, and the gain at about 3/4. Above 3/4, you're always going to get distortion. But if you push that first input, it will distort on the transistor ladder itself. So that's a kind of subtle asymmetric distortion that's nice. Then when you hit the VCA is wired up differentially. It's actually in this configuration that some people use the same circuit as a triangle to sine wave converter. So you could actually turn a triangle into a sine wave there if you kind of paid attention to your levels, and you can get another soft, that would be in the, people are calling it tan H distortion, but tube-like soft distortion. And then it hits that headphone amp, and depending on whether the times 100 switch is in the center or turned on, you'll get sort of like a screaming hard clipping, but a hard clipping that doesn't just stop and become a square wave. It puts all these harmonics in between the square waves.
Do you have a wavetable oscillator in there we can put through?
I do not.
What in the demo case? Yeah, it's limited.
Do you want to put a wavetable oscillator through it?
Any questions? Yeah, we have one up in the demo case. We have a bunch of wavetable. Any questions from the internet audience? None. Question for Gary? For Gary. Is Gary here? Just kidding. He forgot your name. Gary. All right, so let's tell us about interstellar radio and angle grinder, just briefly those, and then those are your other two things. And we've had a lot of, I really like all your modules. One thing I'll comment on, like build quality, it's really, really good. They're built here. There's a secret synth manufacturer called Dark Place back there. They're built here, and like the knobs and everything on these are top notch.
They're solid.
Huh?
They feel solid.
Yeah, I mean it's a really nice.
So the 3 modules I have released, the Interstellar Radio, the Angle Grinder, and the 100 Grit, all made here in Portland. Some people in the audience know something about it. The Interstellar Radio is complicated, but the easiest way, how I usually use it as a noise source, it's stacks and stacks and stacks of FM. So you can get broken shortwave type sounds out of it on to just really extreme harsh. There's at least 4 layers of frequency modulation happening on it. So you can use external inputs or route it back into itself and
That's all right. Get you another one.
oh no, don't worry about it.
It's still good.
It's still good. I use it for hi-hats a lot. I think I still have that set up. Yeah, so I dial in a short envelope and you've got like a decent hi-hat type thing. Yeah. The angle grinder is a quadrature VCA and filter and wave shaper. So you can use it as a additive VCO or to process audio in a number of ways, both the kind of unique grind function and as a state variable filter with lots of extra feedback paths.
Can you explain the damping knob a little bit? I haven't got my head on that one yet.
Sure. So the angle grinder, this is kind of its default. Are we listening to the angle grinder? If you have the damping all the way down and the grind to spin all the way down, then it's being used as an oscillator. It has a, because it's, even though it has a similar architecture to a state variable filter, it has an internal positive feedback loop that's really designed to make it an oscillator. So that's always going because it's designed more as an oscillator than as a filter. But you can cancel that out so that you can use it as a filter by feeding a negative feedback there to cancel the positive feedback, essentially. So right now it's just a sine wave oscillator. We can wave shape it, and it will just stop if you turn the damping up. So if you want to use it as an oscillator, you pretty much always want the damping all the way down. However, when we, that's wrong. So now we're feeding a oscillator in there that still seems to be getting some volts per octave. So if we're listening to the grind out, we're hearing the oscillator kind of compare the four phases of the internal oscillator versus the external oscillator. If we listen to one of these phase outputs, if we have the having an oscillator mode, we're pretty much only going to be hearing this sine wave coming out of here. But if we start feeding the grind section in, then it will start to filter, and you're in this situation where the internal feedback is fighting with an external signal, and you're getting all of these points will start being feedback paths. One technical term for this is a pole mixing filter, essentially. But if you want to cancel out the some of that resonance, these will all add resonance as well. You turn the damping up. So if you have all of these down and the damping up, you have something that's more like a classic multi-mode filter. Like here's it on bandpass. So it's pretty easy to think of it as a reversed traditional resonance knob. It's not entirely true, but that's like, if you treat it that way, you probably won't go wrong. Does that answer your question, or? It's so the TLDR it's a reverse resonance knob, but the technical part of me will never let it stand there because it's not entirely right or true to the intent of the module, but you can treat it that way. Oh yeah, we were walking through the modules. So I think that's all of them. I have I've been doing production runs in Silver, but starting with the 100 grit, I'm also, because taking the panel of the 100 grit off is quite difficult due to those touch points, I'm offering factory-built black PCB faceplates. And you can still get from me the black PCB plate for the angle grinder and the interstellar radio. no retailer has yet asked for them. So right now you have to get them from me, but they're available. Yeah. Thank you, Phil, and thank you for everyone that came out.
Yeah, thank you.
Also, there aren't that many people here, so I brought some angle grinder shirts and just Eric Schlappi t-shirts from the last 2 albums ago that I had in my garage. If anyone wants a t-shirt, Brian, Chris, Daniel, Thomas, cool.
Also, cool, man. That was good. Thank you so much. The other thing I'll mention is, as you heard, Eric's a good musician, and we have a huge selection of local electronic music back there. So we have his CD, his cassette, and other things back there. So thanks everybody for coming out. If there's no other questions, we'll end here, and then obviously this is open. We can all migrate over there and patch it. So thanks again, and next week is really going to be fun. We have on Saturday at 3 o'clock, not 2. We've been starting at 2, but we're starting to push it back because everybody shows up late. But at 3, we're going to have the national sales rep, Joe Causey from Eventide, going through the H9 Max, the new Rose pedal, and the Euro DDL module. So kind of an all-in-one thing for their new products. And so we're really looking forward to that. And that's a free event with free drinks and everything. So hopefully we'll see you next week. And keep an eye out on our website for upcoming shows and things. We've got some really fun stuff coming up. Thanks again, everybody, and thank you, Eric. Oh, and this will be up on YouTube on our channel if you ever want to watch it again. All our stuff goes up there.